essentially, scenarios are stories about the future, and usually they take the form of a story that conveys something about how a certain future situation or state comes to be. Some futurists really argue that you should talk a lot about cause and effect. Others, who are more like myself, think that it's more important to paint like a convincing picture of how the world is in that imagined future, and also make it credible or believable by linking it to the present. Like if you think back to like 1960s, when this like concept was really getting its feet, there was really a desire to be able to tell a lot of detailed information about these, about how the future could be, in a way that was compelling, accessible, but also like able to convey like causality and linkages between different types of phenomena, and how things would go. So Herman Kahn was an early pioneer in this. He did some work for U.S. Military type folks and things like that, and he's also the one who wrote a famous book called On Thermonuclear War, which basically was one scenario, and it was basically the doom scenario where there's nuclear winter and everybody's dead. And so, but it was really thick, a big book, and like describing this in detail and how it came about and what would be the pathways that would lead to it. Then later on, this guy named Per Vack was working at Shell Oil Company, and he started to make scenarios for the management team at Shell. And this was in the 1970s, and they basically were able to be reasonably prepared for the oil crisis, and they weathered the storm of the whole in the 1970s when like oil prices were going all topsy-turvy and there's all sorts of stuff. It's found to be really powerful as an approach for reframing decision making in companies and for planning. And so a whole bunch of futurists started making scenarios, and these days there's like several variations of it. But in all cases, the main thing that's true about them is that they are stories about the future with some link to the present. So you look toward the future and you can think like, okay, I'm thinking of this topic, Mexico City in the future. And if you can imagine this, like you're trying to look at what that future is like, and there's a lot of uncertainty around it. It's kind of cloudy, but there's sort of like something in the middle is like kind of the probabilistic stuff that like, well, it'll probably be something like this. And then as you go to the edges, it's kind of like, I don't know what that's going to be like. And the goal is to make scenarios that are like planted on the, I don't know what it's going to be like. So that's the global business network model. And the idea there was to wind tunnel like strategic choices, or imagine strategic choices you could take to like be robustly navigating that uncertainty. Lately in 2022, there was like articles coming out saying that wind tunneling strategic choices is actually not that helpful to management, that it's actually more important to promote unlearning, to promote reframing, to promote like an ability to see, in a wider way, the conditions that exist now, so that you can correct and course correct what you're doing. Transformational scenarios. And this is a kind of scenario that Finland Futures Research Center has been working with. The basic idea here is you start out with the sort of like desirable condition that you wish to have. So there was a project here called Neocarbon Energy, and the goal was to develop scenario. Well, the goal of the foresight part was to develop scenarios that would indicate what the world could be like if there was 100% renewable energy system, like worldwide. Like, what would it be like? And the scenarios all start from that premise that this is the assumption, is that the future is like this. transformational, quite different than now. But then the foresight team like basically made 4 different scenarios of how that might be, and like what kinds of like activities, what kind of actors are prominent, what kinds of power sharing is going on. So like transformational futures are another type. There's also there was this interesting work in Hawaii. This was pretty popular. The details are rich and like provocative and kind of have some sort of basis on evidence or at least some sort of influence by like some sort of like things that have been seen or imagined. Yeah, in my own experience, though, the danger of this tool is that people can forget that it's just a conversation with some people that's kind of like mediated by the questionnaire. And also in my own research practice, there's a chance inside of the Delphi method to do unusual things. So you can take you can take something of an artistic approach, or you can invite people to think in ways that aren't just like, do you think this indicator will go up or down? Or do you think this will be more or less? But to kind of like allow for people to like share like what kind of metaphors they think of when they think of the future of the city. You can ask for people to think about the future in a probabilistic way, and then also in a desirable way. And then maybe even offer them a reframe that sort of shakes all their expectations about what it could be. Not desirable, not probable, just really different than what anybody's thinking, and see how they respond to it. There is something of transition happening inside of future studies right now as well. Like if you think of like this as like an academic thing, like we're trying to produce knowledge about something, it's been really tempting to say, well, the knowledge we're trying to produce is about the future. We want to know the future. We want to know something about the future. What will it be like? And the funny thing about that question is that the object that you're trying to know about doesn't exist yet. So you can't know, really. So then the question becomes, what can you know? And the answer to what can you know is something about the present. But then if you go into like the present, what can you know about the present? Like you've already done this like situation report, right? Like you're doing this work to figure out what is the situation now. Is that the present? Well, kind of. But when did you start doing that research? And like, what kind of sources do you have? It's not quite exactly the present. It's not now. It's the recent past, and probably indicative of what is now. When we're trying to know something about the future, what we're actually doing is we're trying to know something about the potential for change. And that's what's interesting. So like starting to know something about the potential for change is what allows you to start to identify actions and opportunities and experiments you can conduct toward the ultimately unknowable future. And this is the level to and extent to the agency that you have. Like even if you decided that you wanted to come into this project and say, we will come up with a perfect roadmap for a sustainable transition to Mexico City, and you wrote that and it was perfect and beautiful, it may not work. It may not happen. Because in the end of the day, it's always complex. Everybody's got different things going on. And the level of agency is always like a certain amount. Like you can do some things, you can do some things toward the future, and you can produce some outcomes. As we go through time, there are these moments where we say, we realize we have a fuller comprehension of the thing than we did before. So it's like there's a phenomena, and then we get to these points and we're like, aha, this is what was happening. This is what it is, right? And this keeps happening. It's like layering on top of itself. And so framing is really the key to what's going on with futures. Future is framing perception of transformation, of potential for transformation. And when you start to see through alternate futures or different futures, or experiment with like a wild range of futures, future images from others, future stories, scenarios, you start to see different kinds of possibilities. You start to see different things about the present. Those futures are like kind of influenced by all sorts of things in society, media, etc. And to give people permission to like play with it and like move it around and like try. When a group of people in particular like gets really like fixated on one perfect future, that it brings all sorts of risk with it, like a risk of harm, basically, because like what right do we today have to tell people tomorrow what kind of conditions they should have? But at the same time, it's true that what right do we people today have to make the conditions tomorrow terrible by and even knowing something about how terrible they might be? So it's not an abdication of responsibility towards making the conditions better in the future and doing our best to do so. It's more of an acknowledgement of the fact that even if you come up with the most ideal vision of what the future could be like, it is only that. It is only an imagined future. And the most important thing to do with it is to look for potential for change in the present, and to take action in the present.